The gate was already closing. People were rushing past. But he froze, because sitting on a cold metal bench was a little girl, alone, crying. And something about her pigtails, the way she clutched her doll. He couldn't move. Not after what happened 5 years ago. So when they called his name one last time for boarding, he just said 4 quiet words. "Tell them I'm not coming." And when the dad found out why, he did something that changed his life. If you believe the world needs more kindness like this, hit that subscribe button. And if you do the same in his shoes, comment respect below. Walter Briggs was 63 years old and had learned to carry grief like an old injury, always there, but manageable most days. He wasn't a man who talked much about feelings or made a fuss about anything. 22 years in the army had taught him to keep moving forward, and 30 years as a mechanic had taught him that most problems could be fixed if you just rolled up your sleeves and got to work. But some things couldn't be fixed. He was sitting in Terminal B at Denver International, waiting for his flight back to Phoenix. He'd just come from Chicago, where his late daughter's friends had organized a memorial fundraiser in her honor. 5 years since the accident, and people still remembered Emma, still cared enough to raise money for the children's hospital where she used to volunteer. Walter carried a photo of her in his wallet, 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, pigtails crooked because she'd insisted on doing them herself that morning. He also wore a small bracelet with her name engraved on it, Emma Marie Briggs. His whole world gone in an instant when a drunk driver ran a red light. That's why, when he saw the little girl on the bench, his breath caught in his throat. She looked so much like Emma. Same age, same pigtails, same way of holding onto her doll like it was the only safe thing in the world. She was crying quietly, the way children do when they're trying to be brave but don't know how. People walked past her, travelers in a hurry, focused on their own destinations, their own problems. But Walter couldn't look away. He couldn't move. Because in that moment, she wasn't a stranger's child. She was every parent's worst nightmare made real. Walter had been watching her for maybe 10 minutes when 2 men in business suits approached the girl. They were smooth, professional, the kind of men who knew how to talk to children. "Hey there, sweetheart," one of them said, crouching down to her level. "We're friends with your daddy. He sent us to come get you." The other man pulled out a candy bar. "Want some chocolate? Your dad's waiting for you." The little girl looked up at them with wide, uncertain eyes. She clutched her doll tighter. And that's when Walter stood up. He'd seen enough in his years, both in the service and as a father, to know that something wasn't right. Real parents don't send strangers to collect their children. Real family friends don't lead with candy and vague promises. "No, you're not," Walter said, his voice calm but firm as he approached. "You're not friends with her father." The 2 men looked up, annoyed. "Sir, this is a family matter. We're handling it." "Then where's the family?" Walter asked, positioning himself between the men and the girl. "What's her name? What's her father's name? Where were they supposed to meet?" The men exchanged glances. The smoothness was gone now, replaced by something harder. "This isn't your business, old man." "Actually," Walter said, pulling out his phone, "I think it is. I'm calling security." The men backed away quickly, melting into the crowd like they'd never been there at all. Walter turned to the girl, who was staring up at him with the same wide eyes. "Hi there," he said gently, sitting down beside her on the bench. "I'm Walter. What's your name?" "Lily," she whispered. "That's a pretty name. Where's your dad, Lily?" "He went to get coffee," she said, pointing vaguely down the concourse. "He told me to wait right here, but that was a long time ago." Walter looked at his watch. His flight was boarding. Last call. "Tell them I'm not coming," he said to the gate agent, who was calling his name, while Walter sat with Lily, sharing a protein bar from his carry-on and listening to her tell him about her doll whose name was Princess Sparkles and who was very brave but sometimes got scared. Chaos was erupting in the VIP lounge 2 terminals over. Nolan Grant was a man accustomed to solving problems. As the CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies, he dealt with crises daily, but this wasn't a server crash or a stock price dip. This was his 8-year-old daughter. missing in one of the busiest airports in America. He'd been taking an important call from Tokyo, the kind that couldn't wait, the kind that affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. Lily had been sitting right there, coloring in her book, safe in the private lounge. The call took 20 minutes. When he hung up, her chair was empty. Now, 45 minutes later, airport security was searching every bathroom, every restaurant, every corner of the terminal. TSA had Lily's description. His security team was pulling surveillance footage, and Nolan was trying not to think about every terrible possibility his imagination could conjure. That's when a young airport employee approached him. "Sir, I think we found her. She's at gate 14 with a man. Security's on their way." Nolan's blood turned to ice. "Take me there, now." The group that descended on gate 14 looked like a small Army airport security, Nolan's personal protection team, and several men in suits who'd appeared as if from nowhere when word got out that a Fortune 500 CEO's child was missing. Walter saw them coming and slowly raised his hands, keeping his movements calm and visible. Lily looked up from the story he'd been telling her about a puppy he'd once rescued. "Is she yours?" Walter asked the man pushing through the crowd, tall, expensively dressed, with the same dark hair as the little girl. Nolan dropped to his knees and pulled Lily into his arms, holding her so tightly that Walter had to look away for a moment. It reminded him too much of hugs he'd never get to give again. "Daddy," Lily said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "This is Walter. He told me about a puppy, and he gave me crackers, and some bad men wanted to take me, but he made them go away." Nolan looked up at Walter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "What happened?" Walter explained briefly, quietly. The two men, the offer of candy, how they disappeared when challenged. "You saved her," Nolan said. Walter shook his head. "Just kept her company until you found her." "What's your name?" "Walter Briggs." Nolan stood, still holding Lily. "Mr. Briggs, I don't know how to thank you." Walter was already gathering his things. "No need. Glad she's safe." But as Walter turned to leave, Nolan made a decision that would change both their lives. "Mr. Briggs, wait." Nolan's voice carried the kind of authority that came from running boardrooms and making decisions worth billions. "Where are you flying to?" "Phoenix," Walter said. "But I missed my flight." "No, you didn't," Nolan said. "You're flying with us." An hour later, Walter found himself on a private jet unlike anything he'd ever imagined. The pilot, a former Air Force colonel, saluted him when they were introduced. The flight attendant offered him coffee in actual china cups. Nolan personally helped him with his small duffel bag. Lily insisted on sitting next to Walter during takeoff. She chattered about school, about her puppy at home, about how her mother used to braid her hair before she passed away 2 years earlier. Walter listened, asked gentle questions, smiled at her stories. But he didn't mention Emma, not yet. It wasn't until they were cruising at 30,000 feet that Nolan sat down across from Walter. "Can I ask you something?" Nolan said. "Why did you miss your flight? You could have called security and kept walking. Why did you stay?" Walter was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the clouds. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. 5 years ago, my daughter Emma was supposed to meet me at the airport in Phoenix. I was coming home from my last deployment. She was so excited, had been counting down the days on her calendar. But there was an accident on her way there. Drunk driver ran a red light. He handed Nolan the photo. Emma, 8 years old, pigtails askew, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera. "She looks just like Lily," Nolan said softly. "That's what I thought when I saw her on that bench. I couldn't leave her there alone. I just couldn't." They talked for the rest of the flight. Nolan learned that Walter lived alone in a small apartment in Phoenix, that he worked part-time at a veterans center, that he spent his weekends volunteering at the children's hospital where Emma used to help with the younger patients. Walter learned that Nolan had been raising Lily alone since his wife died, that building his company had sometimes meant missing school plays and bedtime stories, that he was trying to figure out how to be both a CEO and a single father. As they prepared to land in Phoenix, Nolan made Walter an offer. "I have a question for you," he said. My company has a veterans leadership program. It's supposed to help former military transition into civilian careers, but honestly, it's not working. We need someone who understands what veterans actually need, someone who's been there. Walter shook his head. I'm not a corporate guy, Mr. Grant. I fix engines. You fixed something more important today, Nolan said. You kept my daughter safe, and I think maybe Emma would want you to help other people the way you helped us. He handed Walter a business card with a phone number written on the back. Think about it. The job comes with a good salary, benefits, and, he smiled, unlimited access to the company jet, for official business, of course. Lily, who had been pretending to nap, opened her eyes. Does that mean Walter can come visit us? If he wants to, Nolan said. Walter looked at the photograph of Emma, then at Lily's hopeful face, then out the window at the Phoenix lights coming into view. For the first time in 5 years, the future looked like something worth moving toward. Walter did take the job. 6 months later, the Veterans Program had a waiting list. He helped former soldiers find not just employment, but purpose. He understood their struggles because he'd lived them. Lily visited the Veterans Center with her father every few weeks. She learned to play chess from a former Navy SEAL and heard stories about far-off places from men and women who'd served around the world. She was everyone's honorary granddaughter. And Walter? He kept Emma's photo in his wallet, but he also had new pictures, now Lily at her school play, the Veterans Program graduation ceremonies, moments that reminded him that life, even after loss, could still hold unexpected grace. Sometimes the most important flights are the ones you miss. Sometimes the most significant journeys begin when you choose to stay right where you are, with someone who needs you to be present. Walter Briggs learned that love doesn't end with loss, it transforms. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it finds new ways to show up in your life when you need it most.